Representative Lou Correa didn't raise his voice, but when he spoke, the entire room shifted. In just a few minutes, he exposed one of Washington's most stunning contradictions, a government that's cutting the very agency meant to protect you, while quietly boosting its own security. The moment was subtle, but the message was explosive: safety for them, risk for everyone else. What began as a calm budget hearing turned into a reckoning over who really gets protected in America. IT started with a simple chart: domestic terrorism on the rise, violent threats growing, and communities stretched thin. Correa didn't waste time with politics. He talked about what was happening back home: lone wolf attacks, school shootings, and even a peaceful vigil hijacked by extremists.
Two assassination attempts on the president, school shooting, Minnesota last month, and closer to home, just a couple of days ago, Huntington Beach, peaceful vigil for Charlie Clark, infiltrated by neo-Nazis who essentially made the local individuals attending that event fear for their safety. All of us know that a lot of these domestic attacks are by lone wolves, but yet they do leave clues, social media or elsewhere. Director Patel, you're it. You're the thin blue line. The FBI, your job to protect our citizens back home from those that would harm us. You have to find the needle in the haystack. Takes a lot of work, a lot of resources. Talking to my local sheriff this morning, who said they're concerned. Federal cuts to local grants that help them do the job. Then, of course, let's not forget about other threats that are coming before us, like high-tech fraud. Local senior recently was talking to me about a text she had gotten, a demand by the IRS to send a payment immediately, or the IRS agents were on their way to arrest this individual. Pretty gutsy stuff by folks probably from Europe, North Korea, Russia, China, people, okay, going after those precious savings our senior citizens rely on. Yet the president's proposing a budget cut of $500 million or more to your organization, the FBI. You've said that that'll essentially equate to about 1,300 less jobs at the FBI. So I'm going to ask you essentially, what is it that we can do to help you do your job? Little concerned. Friday Night Lights. One of the events I love to do on Friday nights, go to the local high school football game. Sit there at the stadium and you always say, what if? What if? You're the thin blue line. Can you do your job cutting $500 million from your budget?
Thank you, sir. I think we are doing our job, and the distinction is with the budget that we have, we are flexing more resources to the field. California is receiving the largest FBI plus-up of any state in the union due to that plus-up. They're not getting a reduction. No state is getting a reduction. Every state is getting a plus-up. And so I'm utilizing the money that we have to first plus it up. And the empty vacancies that we have, those haven't been filled in years, not under my leadership.
Here's my concern. You're going to do well, you're doing more with less, is what you're saying. Yet we're about to vote on a budget that has $88 million more to protect members of Congress, the executive branch, and the Supreme Court. There's a contradiction here. Back on Main Street, we're saying you can do more with less, you can protect them with less money, yet here in Washington, we're saying we need more money to protect members of Congress. It's a little contradiction here, or maybe, sir, you ought to talk to leadership about coming in with your management style to protect the Supreme Court, Congress, and the administration. Otherwise, it's essentially a hypocritical situation. We need more protection, yet folks on Main Street can do with less.
My concern is folks on Main Street. We also were, I think we received over $300 million in the big, beautiful bill, and we're also receiving pots of money from our interagency, so this sort of $500 million cut isn't entirely accurate.
You're still getting cut 200 million plus. You're still moving your agents to do ICE work, so you are leaving a lot of bases uncovered. And I'm not going to be argumentative with you, Director Patel. I'm just saying, if that thin blue line does not hold, people on Main Street will pay the price.
I agree with you, sir.
And I just look forward to working with you, because I am very concerned that these kinds of budget cuts are short-sighted, especially when my local sheriff calls me and says, we need more support, and we're looking at budget cuts.
I'll work with you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield time.
Mr. Chairman, I have another unanimous consent request.
He painted a picture anyone could understand. Parents under Friday night lights wondering if they're safe in their own hometowns. Then came the quiet punch. The FBI's budget was being cut by $500 million. And the man sitting across from him, Director Kash Patel, was expected to explain how the agency would somehow keep Americans safe with 1,300 fewer agents on the ground. Correa leaned forward and asked the question everyone else avoided. Can you still protect the public after a $500 million cut? For a moment, Patel seemed confident. He used polished words like flexing resources and plus-ups, promising that California would receive the largest increase in FBI support. It sounded smooth, until Correa pressed harder. So you're saying you can do more with less? Because here in Washington, we're about to vote on $88 million more for security around Congress and the Supreme Court. Yet the people on Main Street are being told to make do with less. How is that fair? The air went heavy. That was the moment Correa exposed what he called the double standard: safety for the powerful, sacrifice for everyone else. Patel tried to respond, insisting that the cuts weren't real, that money had already come in from other interagency allocations. But Correa didn't let go. You're still being cut $200 million plus, he said firmly. And you're still moving your agents into immigration work under DHS. That means fewer people stopping cybercriminals, fewer eyes watching extremists, fewer partnerships with local police. Every word landed like a stone. Correa wasn't arguing politics. He was arguing reality. His voice stayed calm, but his point cut through the noise. If the thin blue line breaks, the people who pay the price aren't in Washington. They're the families sitting under those Friday night stadium lights. Patel shifted again, repeating that no state is losing funding. But that wasn't the question. The question was whether anyone would be left to protect Americans when resources were spread too thin. The flexing Patel bragged about was really the quiet dismantling of vital teams, domestic terrorism units, cyber fraud investigators, even agents tracking online extremist chatter. Every reassignment meant fewer boots on the ground. Every unfilled vacancy meant a potential lead that would never be followed. And while Patel used bureaucratic language to defend the numbers, Correa translated it into human cost. Fewer agents means fewer chances to stop the next tragedy before it happens. That's when Correa hit him with the comparison that froze the room. You're being told to protect Americans with less money, while Washington gives itself $88 million more for protection. Maybe, Director Patel, they should hire you to manage their security, since you're apparently able to do more with less. It wasn't a joke. It was a mirror held up to power. The same government that talks about law and order was defunding the very force tasked with enforcing it. Correa's tone was surgical. No yelling, no theatrics, just facts that couldn't be spun. Behind Patel's talking points was something bigger, a shift in priorities. Reports later showed that while the FBI's budget for community-level safety was being slashed, massive sums were redirected to political enforcement programs and immigration crackdowns. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill Patel mentioned wasn't a rescue plan. It was a reallocation, moving resources from protecting citizens to protecting political optics. Correa didn't need to say it directly. The contrast spoke for itself. The same administration cutting funds for domestic safety had quietly boosted spending on agencies used for surveillance and detainment. Less protection for neighborhoods. More control for Washington. And that's where the real hypocrisy showed. The FBI's mission is supposed to be clear: protect the American people and uphold the law. But under shrinking budgets and political interference, it was being stretched, twisted, and hollowed out. Patel kept saying no state would lose money. But he couldn't explain how no state loses when there are 1,300 fewer agents nationwide. That's not redistribution, that's reduction. It's math you can't argue with. And as Correa pointed out, when budgets get gutted, It's the small towns, not the capital, that feel it first. Korea's Friday Night Lights example struck a nerve because it turned statistics into something real. He talked about sitting in the bleachers, watching kids play, and thinking, what if? What if something happens here and there aren't enough agents or officers to respond? What if the safety net we count on is already threadbare? Those weren't rhetorical questions, they were warnings. Because when the FBI loses manpower, the threats don't pause. Domestic extremism keeps growing. Cyber scammers keep stealing. Hate groups keep organizing. The world doesn't slow down because Washington decided to tighten its belt. Patel, for all his composure, couldn't hide the cracks in his argument. When Correa asked whether agents were being reassigned to immigration duties, Patel admitted it. Yes, many were now working under DHS contracts. That meant fewer agents tackling homegrown threats and more involved in political operations. The irony was impossible to miss. The administration that called itself tough on crime was quietly gutting the very team that investigates it. Selective enforcement, that's what Correa was calling out, even if he didn't use those words. Protection for power, not for people. And yet, Correa didn't frame it as a partisan attack. He framed it as oversight, exactly what Congress is supposed to do. He didn't shout or accuse. He questioned, calmly and persistently. If that thin blue line doesn't hold, he said, people on Main Street will pay the price. That single sentence captured the entire meaning of the hearing. Because behind every budget cut is a real-world consequence. One fewer agent tracking a suspect, one more scam that slips through, one community left unprotected when something goes wrong. The longer Patel spoke, the clearer the picture became. Every justification revealed how Washington's priorities had shifted inward. More funding to guard its own buildings. Less for field offices across the country. The same officials who demand respect for law enforcement were quietly defunding the professionals who actually keep people safe. And when they were confronted about it, they called it efficiency. Correa called it what it was. Hypocrisy. As the hearing drew to a close, Patel thanked Correa for his concern and promised to work together. But the damage was done. The contradiction was now part of the public record. You can't claim to stand for safety while cutting the people who enforce it. You can't praise the thin blue line and then make it thinner. And you can't talk about protecting Americans if the only ones you're protecting are the ones sitting behind the gates of Washington. Outside the hearing, Correa's exchange spread fast. Clips of his question, "Can you protect the public after $500 million is cut from your budget?" began circulating online. It wasn't just political commentary. It was a gut-level question everyone could feel. Because at some point, every viewer had wondered the same thing. If something happens in my town, who's left to stop it? That's what made this moment so powerful. It broke through the partisan noise and hit a universal truth. Safety shouldn't depend on privilege. In the days that followed, Patel's comments about plus-ups and interagency transfers came under scrutiny. Analysts found that most of those increases were temporary reallocations, borrowed money, not new funding. In other words, the FBI was being asked to do more with less, just as Correa said. And while the Capitol strengthened its own barriers, local sheriffs were left struggling with smaller grants and longer wait times for federal support. The double standard wasn't theoretical anymore. It was measurable. That's what makes Correa's performance so striking. He didn't just confront an official. He forced a conversation about priorities. Who deserves protection first, the people or the powerful? When you strip away the politics, that's the question that matters. The exchange revealed what happens when leadership forgets that safety is supposed to flow outward, not upward. By the end of the hearing, even Patel seemed to realize the optics. His final line, "I'll work with you, sir," wasn't just a polite gesture. It sounded like quiet resignation. Because how do you defend a budget that protects the elite while leaving neighborhoods vulnerable? You can't. Correa had done what oversight is meant to do. Expose the truth hidden in plain sight. The next time you hear someone claim the system is protecting you, remember this moment. Remember the calm voice that asked a simple question and stripped away the excuses. Because real safety doesn't come from headlines or press conferences. It comes from priorities. And when those priorities shift away from people, the consequences ripple through every community. Republic. Lou Correa didn't just question a budget. He questioned a belief that America can stay safe while starving the institutions that keep it that way. He reminded the country that protection shouldn't be a privilege reserved for those behind marble walls. It should belong to the families sitting in the stands, the seniors answering a phone call, the teachers watching their students. That's who law and order was meant to serve. And if you believe that real safety means everyone deserves protection, not just the powerful, make sure this story doesn't disappear. Share it, talk about it, and keep asking the questions that others avoid. Because the moment we stop demanding answers is the moment that thin blue line finally breaks. That don't let that happen. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned. There's more truth to uncover.